Hi there, my name's Gio. Recently a friend of mine was wondering how I color manga panels, and I thought I'd use this as an opportunity to showcase how I do it. But to prove that I can color things, here are a few examples of things I've done in the past. Alright, so when you're first coloring manga panels, you may not know how to do it. So just for context, I am using Clip Studio Paint. I have got a drawing tablet, but you can do this with a pen and just a mouse. Now, when you first color manga panels, you may not really know what to do. You've got your high quality page, and you're like, okay, I want to color inside the lines. How do I do that? The easiest and most effective way is to use the multiply layer. Now, I can't speak for every art program, but the big ones such as Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, and Fire Alpaca, which is free, so you could use that, all have the ability to change the blending layer. Now, I don't really know how blending layers work in depth, but what you need to know is that the multiply layer is your best friend here. And you may start drawing on top and think, well, nothing's changed. If we go into a layer underneath, you'll suddenly notice that anything which is pure white will get covered. Now, it cannot be used to color black. I'll cover coloring black once I've gone over the basics. But what this means is that we can now very easily color inside the lines. Now, how you color is going to vary from person to person, from process to process, but the way I'm going to show you is pretty much considered the most universal approach from what I understand. Okay, so how do we color this guy in? Because it's quite easy that we could just, try and paint it in, like, very careful like, but there is the possibility that there will be little gaps, as you can see here, or that you don't fully color things in. So what we're going to use is the polyline tool. This is similar to the selection tool, only you can make whatever shape you want with it. So we're going to use this to go and color all of the bits of Ranma which would be skin. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a little bit messy, because if you're anything like me, you'll probably want to be able to add or remove from this selection. Now, I've changed my selection mode so it will always add, so I can just, add in a bunch more to fill in the portion that I didn't select. But if you're not like that, you can press the plus key. Oh, sorry, not the plus key. You can press the shift button to add to your selection. Now, I would not recommend this. I think that this is a bit of a slow way to do it. However, you can do that. You can also use Alt to remove from your selection. Now, I'll be honest, this is not the most fun thing. It is very satisfying to see something fully come together, but it is a bit time consuming trying to make sure that all of the lines are filled, particularly when there's gaps. You kind of have to do a little bit of interpretation on where you want to fill the lines, and particularly when it comes to more sort of sketchy styles, you kind of need to be the judge of where the various lines will be. Alright, I'm going to shut up and then I'm going to fast forwards this once I've done it. Alright, now we've filled this all in. You may wonder, okay, how do we actually get it that color? You can manually just color it, but if you have the option to, I would recommend using the fill tool wherever you can. It'll make your life a lot easier, and particularly when it comes to just blocking out colors, it is incredibly useful. Now then, before we move on to the next thing, I want to talk about something that's a little bit nitty gritty, but something that I think is incredibly important, and that's making sure your layers are manageable. Now, the way that I've done it in previous pieces, and the way I'll be doing it for this piece, is that what I tend to do is I'll make a folder for each character, and then I'll put the files that I want, the layer files that I want, into that folder. And labeling them can save a lot of headache, particularly if you want to add in shading or highlights or paint over the top of these. So for Ranma, I think that the easiest way to color him is the skin, the gi, the little hair braid here, and the eyes. I think that is all that I would need to do for the colors of him. So I'm going to quickly fill those in, and then we're going to talk about adding in detail. Okay, now, before I continue with Ranma, I do want to do a tiny bit of tidying when it comes to the eyes. Now, particularly when it comes to eyes, there will very likely be a gap that you need to interpret and decide on what shape you want to make it. And particularly when it comes to eyes which are in this kind of angle, you also need to decide whether or not it looks right to have a bit of white in front of the eye too. Now, I think that all in all, I'm pretty happy with this. You will notice that there are the occasional error here. This is where layers come very handy, where you can decide and figure out where best to get these sort of little issues. Now, I'd highly recommend having your own palette here, because if you are to select from the actual piece itself, it is very unlikely that you'll get a different color if it's not in halftones or anything. But as you can see, there is little artifacts here, and stuff like that can cause the colors to kind of change and shift. But if you do want to quickly select from a piece, what I'd recommend you do is you simply turn off the manga page, so then you can just pick the pure colors. Alright, now that we've got our basic Ranma, what I think we want to do now is add in a bit of detail. How you want to add in detail and how you want to stylize your pieces is entirely up to you. I'm not going to force anything on you. This is just going to be exploring a bit of how I do it. So, you want to make sure that you can be as non-destructive as possible, because maybe at some point you'll add in, I'm just quickly adding a masked layer. Maybe you want to add in, I don't know, you add in some orange, but then you realize you want Ranma's skin to match this orange. Now, if this was all one layer, that might be very, very difficult to do. But if you've separated out your layers, you could very easily add in a, I don't know, maybe you want Ranma to be yellow. You can do that very easily and very efficiently when you use your layers properly. Okay, so how are we going to make Ranma look a bit more interesting? Well, how I tend to do it is, particularly when it comes to lighter skin, when you're painting, what you typically want is for the nose area to be a bit redder, for the chin area to be a little bit bluer, and the forehead to be a little bit yellower. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but it is one that I sometimes use to give faces a little bit more pop. Now, in addition to this, what I tend to use is the soft bleed brush that comes with the soft bleed watercolor brush that comes with Clip Studio. And as you can see, it's minimal at first, but it adds that little bit of detail to Ranma's nose. Now, how far you want to go with this is entirely up to you. I think that the base colors, even just doing the base colors, can be an incredibly gratifying process, but you can get pretty extensive with this stuff. And yeah, I think that I'm gonna keep this fairly basic just for the tutorial's sake, but you can keep adding and layering on details. Now, one thing that I quite like doing just as part of my artistic process is using the hue, saturation, luminosity. Now, this might go by different names in other programs, but this is just a very quick and easy way for you to adjust a color on, or adjust a layer and make it a different color. Now, what if you want to add a change like that, but not have it permanently change the layer? Maybe you want to flick back and forwards. So, the way we're going to do this is I want to change Ranma's gi to be a different color. Let's say I want to try and see how it look with an orangey color, but I also want this to be reversible. Okay, so we go over to the layers portion, and what you do is you add a new correction layer, and for this case we would want hue, saturation, luminosity. Now we've got the hue, saturation, and luminosity, but as you can see in the layers, it's its own separate layer. Now, just because of how these tend to work, this will change everything at first. So, unfortunately, Ranma becomes entirely different colored. But, on the bright side, is if you select OK, you can then add Clip to Layer Below. And this provides a very quick and easy way for us to flick between these two. Now, this doesn't always get used in this way, but you can use it for all kinds of things, particularly once you understand how layer masks work. Okay, so I've added a bit more detail onto Ranma here. This isn't my best job ever, I'll be the first to admit that. But I think that some of the colours are a bit off. Particularly this sort of low light colour, I'm not particularly happy with how it looks. However, this is where our good friends, the layers, the correction layers come in. You can use all of these, but the ones I tend to use are brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, luminosity, and the color balance. Now, I want these to maybe be a little bit more purple or a little bit less purple. So let's try using the color balance. Now, before I edit anything, I am going to clip this onto the previous layer. And as you can see, all of these are clipped onto my skin layer. Okay, now let's take a look at what happens if I crank this towards the magenta. Okay, this isn't entirely ideal. It's going to crank everything to the magenta. So, what you might want to do is you want to have it only affect the layer underneath it. And whilst these layer stacks can be useful, it can be a little bit of a problem. So, how do we fix this? I'm going to turn off this single darker layers clipping mask to the skin layer. Now, if I want to keep a similar sort of shape for it, there is something that we can do, which is give it a layer mask. So, I'm going to hover over the skin layer, I'm going to hold Control, and then click. Now, what this basically does is select an outline, as you can see by the little walking dots, around the entirety of this layer. This means we have got the same selection area that things in the same layer stack have. What you can do is then create a layer mask. This means that now this layer is entirely restricted to what the skin layer is. This isn't the best solution, but this is the one that I tend to use. But with this, the color balance will suddenly only affect the layer it is clipped to. Now this is perfect. This is exactly what we're wanting. So I'm going to adjust some of these to something I'm a little bit more satisfied with. I think I wanted it to be a little bit more purple, so I'm gonna shift it slightly towards blue and magenta. I don't know if I want it to be more cyan or not. Okay, I'm kind of happy with this, but I still don't really like it. So, what we can do is we can then add in a brightness contrast. Now this will change the brightness and the contrast. And how much you want it to change by, oh dear, very much depends on what you're going for, because you can have a very contrasty piece or you can have something a lot more muted and less extreme. Alright, let's just take a look and see what happens if we turn the contrast all the way up. Contrast and brightness all the way up. It turns white. What if we turn it all the way down? Suddenly it's almost all black. It's all become very muted. So, let's get back to around 0. Alright, so what happens if we turn the brightness up a bit? Well, it makes less of this sort of contrast. It's significantly lighter, and I think that kind of harmonizes more with this piece. What if we were to turn the contrast up too? Well, it's a little bit more poppy now. It's kind of standing out more. That's not really what I want if it's going to be the shadow areas. So, if I turn the contrast down, it can make it a little bit easier on the eyes. Okay, now let's see a before and after. This is what it's like before, and this is what it's like after. See, it's not an insane difference, but it's enough to make the piece feel more unified. Alright, I'm going to do a few more of these, then I'm going to talk about black, because this is something that I haven't fully been able to solve myself. Okay, so now we've got our Ranma. I think that this is looking pretty good now, but let's say I wanted to make the text red. How would I go about doing that? Okay, so above your multiply layer, make a layer and set its blending to hard light. I'm going to pick a nice sort of red color, and then I can paint over the top of it. Now, as you can see, this is primarily catching just the pure black. However, it's not exclusively catching it. This is why I think that this is a bit of a sort of quick and dirty solution, which isn't great because, as you can see, unlike the multiply layer, it does do stuff on white. So I'm sure that there are better ways of doing it, but the way that I've found works is this. You can paint over the top of the black. Now, you could use our selection method for before. However, I feel that just because of how letters are far more organic, it can be an absolute pain to do that. So I'm just going to stick to using my tablet pen to cover the letters and try and catch any of the sort of tiny little anti-aliasing black spots as well. It's a little bit difficult, and if anyone has got a better solution, please share it in the comments, because I would love to know one too. Okay, now, if you're a bit like me, you've probably noticed that there's a bunch of little bits where it overlaps. Now, again, I'm not super familiar when it comes to coloring in pure black for manga, but what I'll just tend to do is turn on and off the layer where your colored letters are, just so that you can get a bit of a sense of which bits are a bit too much and which bits are fine. Alright, cool. I'm going to try and change that color a little bit, because at the moment I think it's a bit too bold, but that is a nice sort of color which I can sort of go with. Now, the one thing you should remember when it comes to hard light and other blending modes is that the color that you've got and the color that is on the page are going to be different. So if you are wanting to grab a color, if you want to grab this color and color in maybe the outline, you may notice it's not the same color. Now, the way you can fix this is by switching temporarily to your normal blending mode. Now, this doesn't have the effect I want, so if we scroll down and put it back on hard light, we can then use the same color as the outline for this bubble. Alright, I'm going to do that, and then we can talk about the background. Okay, now that we've got our character and we've got our speech bubble colored, it's pretty easy, as you can probably tell, that we can just fill in the background. It's basically the exact same as Ranma, however we don't have the issue of necessarily needing to stick to a specific shape. Now, I'm just going to go onto the rectangle selection, and we can just fill this in. Now, you may notice that because we didn't color, this entire area where the speech bubble is has also become the same color as the background. This is a bit of an issue, but this can be very readily solved by, let's say, getting white and using the same process as before with the polyline to fill out the shape. Okay, now all I want to do is slightly change that to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. And then what we can do is add in a clip to layer below layer. And then we can just do whatever the hell we want. Because the great part about manga coloring is whilst there are definitely some things which are easier or harder to do, the vast majority of the skills are very much open to your interpretation, open to your own artistic sensibilities. And what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to make a bit of a gradient happen, where we go from kind of a darker color to a lighter yellow here. And it doesn't need to be complex, it doesn't need to be fancy, but it needs to be what you think would look cool or fun or accurate or whatever you're going for. I myself, I quite enjoy somewhat accurate, but I also enjoy trying to make up color schemes for characters who haven't got color schemes, and generally just have a bit of fun with it. Alright, I'm just going to try and blend these together a little bit more. I see, I'm on the copy stamp. And there's a million different ways you can do this stuff. This is by no means the best or the only way. This is just what I want to do for this one. Okay, now let's say that I want to isolate this area of the picture for Ranma. Now, what you can do is pretty easy. So before I do any changes to try and, for example, get rid of his dad or get rid of the panel above, I'm going to copy this layer because unfortunately you can accidentally destroy things and it can be annoying to get them back. So make sure to save copies of your manga layer, or if you're trying to do any particularly drastic changes. And then what I'm just going to do is very similar to what we've done before, just select the areas I don't want and delete them. Now, because this is a very non-destructive method, I think that there are probably better ways of doing this. Unfortunately, I do not know these better ways, so I'm just going to teach you how I've used it before. Alright, and with that, we've got Ranma. Now, what I'm going to do is simply, I'm going to grab all of these layers, and then I'm going to new from clipboard. Okay. Now I've got a separate thing, which is exclusively the layers that I've used. I'm going to select this box, click crop, and just like that, I've got my little Ranma all done and dusted. Alright, I hope that this has been helpful. I'm going to put a couple of different manga colorists on screen with credits here. Feel free to tell me your own manga coloring stories and tips. Feel free to share any work that you might make. And yeah, just take inspiration. It doesn't necessarily need to be how the official author colors things. It doesn't even need to be how other people like me do it. The great part about manga coloring is basically anything goes. And yeah, just have fun with it. I hope that this has been helpful. Feel free to ask questions down below. And yeah, thank you.